Welcome to the Lore and Valor podcast. I'm your host, Justin Watson, and I'm back with another Hot Wash After Action review. Today, we're talking about The Legend of Vox Machina, which is an animated series available on Amazon Prime. It's based on the wildly popular D&D streaming series Critical Role, wherein, as Matt Mercer himself puts it, a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors gather together to play D&D. Now, in the world of tabletop RPGs, enthusiasm for and knowledge of Critical Role is a bit of a shibboleth. It's a way you let the tribe know you're a fellow nerd, so to speak. I've personally watched a fair chunk of Campaign 1, Vox Machina, which is the source material for this animated series, and a bit of Campaign 2, The Mighty Nine, which is the German for no, not the number 9 in English. I haven't really kept up on Campaign 3. Not that I'm against it. I'm just, pretty busy. And they record, I think, every session they play, which means they're putting out 3 to 4 hours of content every single week, which is both really impressive and kind of daunting if you're trying to keep up with it. So as always, when I talk about TV or streaming, there will be spoilers. I'm not going to go blow by blow through the series, but I will may talk about some plot elements and twists that you might not want to have spoiled for you. So you have been warned. If you intend to watch the show and you really care about spoilers, maybe go watch the show before you watch this video. So first, what I like about the show, obviously the voice acting is on point. Vox Machina themselves, as aforementioned, were all seasoned voice actors. So they were always going to be great. They also got some pretty hefty support in the supporting cast. Chief among these was my second favorite Doctor Who. Well, he's technically the Doctor. The show is Doctor Who. But anyway, my second favorite Doctor, David Tennant, who is the not so subtly villainous General Krieg, the defense minister of the king. He does a great job at it. I like the animation style as well. It's clean and crisp, and it serves the action well. I think you get good kinetics with their animation style. Early on, there's this fight against a blue dragon that feels really epic. Now, in D&D, blue dragons are a subset of evil dragon that breathes lightning instead of fire for their breath weapon. So you get this massive blast of lightning every time it uses its breath weapon, and the way it moves and the way the earth shakes when it lands, it all is just very visceral, very cool, super cool. And furthermore, the way Vox Machina uses their spells and their heroic abilities in creative and frankly even screwball ways to try to defeat the dragon, it's going to be very reminiscent if you've spent a lot of time around a table rolling polyhedral dice. And a lot of the shows like that, you have, I think, the writers clearly trying to evoke the experience of playing D&D in addition to telling you a fantasy storyline. You have, even though you have a rogue and a couple different casters, they always have a hard time getting through doors that are locked. You have, at one point, they burst in on a room full of minions playing D&D on a table in the evil overlord's castle. You even have the druid character Caliph at one point makes a tongue-in-cheek reference to an ability she can only use once per day, which is very flagrantly gamist. It's referencing the limits of her character class in D&D. And frankly, I love that stuff. They clearly knew who the core audience for a Vox Machina show was and wrote appropriately. So I don't mind the D&D Easter eggs. I even enjoy them. But as far as the drawbacks go, they get pretty significant. And I can encapsulate them around 3 characters, really. The first thing that comes to mind is Percy. Now, Percy's actually kind of a cool character overall, but he's this gunslinger, exiled noble, and he wields a weapon that is a combination of early black powder technology and magic. And that's fine. Like, I'm not looking for them to accurately recreate early Renaissance or late medieval firearms. That's not the point. I'm not grading them on that. It's actually pretty cool. His character design and concept. But there's this scene where towards the last quarter of the show, I think, and he's on this quest for vengeance against the people who betrayed him and his family and murdered his parents, and also he thought all of his siblings, although that, spoilers, turns out not to be true. He bursts in on one of their chief henchmen, and this is the tutor, that like their tutor as children, Percy's tutor, who had betrayed them to these evil usurpers. And he's standing there when Percy bursts in, 10 feet away from Percy's sister. Percy has a loaded firearm in his hand. And instead of aiming and shooting at this man who he's sworn vengeance against, the guy's name is on one of the barrels of Percy's gun. That's how intent Percy is on killing this guy. So the first time he sees him, instead of aiming and shooting, he gives the dude like a full minute of dialogue, which is more time than the villain needs to grab Percy's sister and pull her in front of himself as a human shield. And then if that weren't bad enough, then the villain slits Percy's sister's throat and throws her on the ground. Excuse me. And Percy still doesn't shoot him. Now, I get the argument like, oh, he's just so surprised at seeing his sister again. He's distraught that she's mortally wounded. He's not thinking. That's why he drops the gun. It takes a split second to aim a firearm and squeeze the trigger. You're really telling me that as soon as he sees this act of violence committed upon someone he loves, he doesn't want to shoot the guy who did it? It's just, the writing makes no sense to me. So, of course, the villain gets away and into the next scene, which some people might argue like, oh, don't worry about it too much because the villain needed to survive because of rule of cool. So, because if the villain survives, then we get the next fight scene, which is really cool and elaborate and much more dramatic. And that's fine. My problem isn't so much that the villain survived. My problem is that Percy looks stupid for not having taken a clear shot. You're in a world with magic. You could have had it play out so that Percy sees the tutor, tries to shoot him, and there's a shield spell in effect that stops the bullet. Or the tutor has a contingent teleportation spell that moves him out of the way of the bullet faster than human reflexes could. And I'm sure you could think of a dozen other solutions available to you in a world with magic, but they didn't do that. Instead, they just had Percy look like a dumbass, and that to me is the writer falling asleep at the wheel. You can have the rule of cool and have your characters act in a logical manner befitting what you've set up for them. So that scene just really pulled me out of the whole series, and I was pissed off until the end of that episode because it was such cheap blocking. I also didn't like the gnome cleric Pike's arc. Now, Pike is played by Ashley Johnson, who seems like a super nice person, both in the D&D stream and in interviews. She's voice acted in a ton of prominent stuff, shows, video games. She was even in the first Avengers movie. She was the waitress that Captain America saves in the Battle of New York. In a deleted scene, she even gets to flirt with Captain America. It's really cute. All that to say, I really like Ashley Johnson, and I don't have anything against her performance or her as a person, but her character's pretty freaking lame. Pike's whole arc is that she's a cleric, which in D&D means priest with divine magical powers. Healer is the usual role, but they expanded that role to do a lot of other stuff, a lot of smiting and, holy vengeance on evil things for good aligned clerics. So anyway, Pike has this crisis of conscience because she's been engaging in debauchery with her friends and she doesn't feel like maybe they're the most aligned with the philosophy she's supposed to embrace according to her religion. So her powers start to flicker and get weaker, and she realizes she needs to reconnect with her god. And this quest leads her to split from the party and go to this obscure monastery off by itself, wherein she undergoes increasingly difficult and dangerous and demanding rituals to try to commune directly with her god for an extended storyline. And when she finally makes direct contact and her god is speaking to her directly in her mind, and she confesses all her sins for her behavior and says she wants to reconnect with her god and she's sorry, her god's response is, "Nah, it's cool. It's fine. Go out and engage in debauchery with your whoremongering friends. I don't care. Just be yourself." On one level, fine. Not a fictional god doesn't have to have the same kind of strict rules that real religions do, but it's anticlimactic that the answer was, oh, you just had to be okay with it. You weren't doing anything wrong. You don't have to change. You just have to be, at peace with yourself for all the debauchery you engage in. It's not very satisfying. And second of all, and this one's a little more subjective, but since real world religions usually do have tenets that are hard to follow in real life, it's a source of drama that most people, well, sorry, maybe not most people, but a lot of people would have something to latch onto. So, I mean, I'm a pretty vanilla Protestant Christian, and there are aspects of my scripture that I believe in that are hard to wrap your mind around and hard to reconcile with modern life. And I think by shutting that off for this cleric and saying, no, her God is cool with basically anything she does as long as it's not flagrantly evil. I don't know. I think that's not the best writing they could have engaged in. The biggest issue for me, though, aside from stuff like that, which I think is serious but isn't really, it wouldn't really knock it down too far. But the biggest issue for me is there's this tonal dissonance, I think, and that's best encapsulated in the character Scanlan, who is a archetypal horny bard. He's a gnome character, so he's tiny, and they gave him the graphic sex and a lot of the raunchy humor, although all the humor is pretty raunchy in this show. And I'm not so pretentious or aloof that I can't laugh at a good dick joke. And obviously, I cuss myself sometimes. You guys have heard me do it here on the stream. And it there's something about the way it lands, though, that feels, it doesn't feel like how adults talk when they are using profanity or talking about sex. It feels like an adolescent trying very hard to sound like an adult who's talking about sex. It's a little more subjective. I'm having a harder time putting my finger on it, but it just doesn't land quite right. It feels try hard. I know I just leveled a lot of elaborate criticism at Vox Machina, but I still did enjoy this show in the end, and I'm looking forward to season 2. Maybe now that with all the sex and swearing, they've announced as loudly as possible, hey, our show may be a cartoon, but it's not for kids. Maybe now that they've established that, they'll feel more comfortable and maybe dial it in. I don't want to say dial it back, but dial their mature themes and elements in a little more subtly and smoothly to where it doesn't feel as much like it's trying to make a point in and of itself, and feels more like this is the world you live in. You know, adults use swear words, have sex, and it's graphically violent. I don't know. Overall, if you're a D&D geek like me, I think it's probably worth a watch for you, as long as graphic violence, graphic sex, and a lot of bad language doesn't bother you. But I hope the second season picks up. I hope it doesn't maintain quality. I hope it increases in quality. That's about all I've got for now. Please hit like and subscribe. And if you're a rabid critter who thinks I'm full of it and this show is perfect, feel free to put that in the comments. If you're listening to this on one of our audio platforms like Spotify, Audible, or iTunes, please consider leaving me a review. See you next time. And until then, keep up the fire.